New Year's Eve is a holiday meant to celebrate the end of the year and to welcome in a new one. Many people will go to New Year's parties or watch fireworks to celebrate, but there's one New Year's tradition that I cherish more than most. And that tradition was tuning into the Twilight Zone marathon every New Year's Eve.
Stars and Stripes!
Hello and welcome to another Carrot Scraps video, and by another, I mean the 87th. So before we get into the video, the first thing I wanted to mention is, I still live in fear of YouTube's copyright system, and so when it comes to me talking about movies or TV shows, I really want to try avoiding using that footage as much as possible. Because again, YouTube is super sensitive about that stuff. So in this video, you'll see a lot of New Year's footage, an interview with Rod Sterling every now and then a lot of New Year's marathon Twilight Zone commercials, but very little from the actual show itself. Anyway, without further ado, let's start the video. So I'm honestly not sure why Twilight Zone would have a marathon on New Year's Eve to begin with. It's not the only holiday to get the Twilight Zone marathon, I'm pretty sure. I believe 4th of July and various other holidays get one as well. And I definitely tuned into those too. But there was always something about New Year's Eve that signaled to me that it was Twilight Zone time.
New Year's plans making you crazy?
Promise you won't put me in a straitjacket?
Then spend New Year's in another dimension.
Is that how you manage to stay awake?
It's a Twilight Zone marathon.
On New Year's Eve.
And if you miss it, it will still be going on New Year's Day.
Would you tell us what is involved?
44 hours, 72 classic episodes.
This is the happiest day of my life.
The Sci-Fi Channel's Twilight Zone New Year's Marathon begins New Year's Eve at 7 a.m. Eastern, 6 Central.
Now, Twilight Zone, if you're not familiar, is of course the anthology science fiction television show that would chronicle a strange or fantastical story every episode. Created in 1959 with a considerable amount of help from Rod Sterling, the genius behind most episodes. And let's be clear, there were a number of amazing, creative, and talented people working on the show, but Rod Sterling really was the magic man that made it all work. Now, some people mistakenly refer to the Twilight Zone as a horror show, but in my opinion, while many episodes can be creepy and even scary, I don't think every episode is intended to have that effect. I struggle to even call it a science fiction show, but I think I can more reliably count on most, if not all, episodes featuring a science fiction story mechanic. The Twilight Zone actually has a lot of tonal range when it comes to the stories that they choose to tell in the show. Yes, most of the episodes tend to veer into the strange and sometimes horrific end of the Twilight Zone, but there are plenty of other episodes that inspire hope, or episodes that just ask you to wonder in a more positive way. For example, while there are episodes like The Invaders from Season 2, Episode 10, where a woman living in a cabin is slowly driven insane by toy-sized aliens trying to kill her, there are also episodes on the other spectrum like Kick the Can from Season 3, Episode 21. This episode, which was also adapted into the Twilight Zone movie by Steven Spielberg, chronicles the story of a number of older individuals who learn how to restore their youth, if not for a little bit. This range is one of the many things that makes the show so unique in my opinion. In fact, in any media, I think range like this goes a long way for the longevity and the quality of that piece of media. I also think that future Twilight Zone adaptations struggle with this balance. Not sure what tone to go for from episode to episode, and anxious that viewers will be frustrated if the show isn't exactly what they imagined it to be.
There it is, the New Year's Eve ball in Times Square, the Big Apple, New York City, USA. We are live at the spot that's a symbol of New Year's Eve, and tonight 300,000 people have come here to the crossroads of the world to be part of this excitement as we ring in the new year and the new decade. Are you ready? Hi, I'm Natalie Cole coming to you live from New York City, and I am so ready. This evening I'll be sharing with you the fun and the festivities of a CBS tradition. Happy New Year, America 1990. In less than half an hour, we start the countdown. The ball drops and we say, goodbye 80s, hello 90s.
Anyway, to get back on focus, every New Year's Eve I would watch the Twilight Zone marathon. Now, I believe this marathon was broadcasted on the Sci-Fi Channel. I'm honestly not sure. Watching the marathon was extremely important to me. I'd seen the Twilight Zone at other times during the year, and I've seen most of the episodes now and at that time. But there was something about watching the marathon that felt really important. Like I couldn't miss watching the marathon or else, it wouldn't be New Year's. I mean, if Twilight Zone can have a marathon on New Year's Eve, why don't we just have like a Golden Girls marathon on Halloween Eve? I mean, that makes just as much sense. I honestly think that would be really cool. No better way to ring in All Hallows Eve than with your favorite Golden Girls. That sounds like magic to me. Now, I was doing some research for the video, and I was happy to find that I'm not the only one that loves this tradition. And interestingly, there's a lot of literature covering the subject. Even a lot of articles letting people know that this year of 2021, the marathon is still on, which is nice to hear, you know, I'm glad I'm not the only one who loves this. In addition, it's entirely possible that it wasn't just a New Year's Eve tradition. From what I'm seeing, it spans 3 days now, and I assume that it spanned 3 days when I was a kid and I just didn't realize. The best resource I found on the subject was an article by Den of Geek that I'll be linking in the description. Interestingly, it seems as if people aren't exactly sure when this tradition started. The Den of Geek article alleges that potentially the tradition started with other holidays, specifically starting with Thanksgiving, and then more notably with the 4th of July, which is interesting because I mentioned watching the marathon on other holidays at the start of the video, specifically on the 4th of July, which is the other holiday I associate with the marathon.
You've cried. You've begged.
I'll never ask for anything again.
You've pleaded.
Please?
No, you're going to get it.
You'll be sorry.
A 25-hour trip to the places, the faces, the far-out spaces of the Twilight Zone.
It is real. And there is nothing within the realm of knowledge to explain it.
This July, spend your 4th in the 5th dimension with the 25-hour Twilight Zone Marathon. Tomorrow, starting at 8 on Channel 11.
Even more interestingly, from what I can tell, the tradition started on local networks and regional parts of the United States, which eventually spread to larger networks. Reading from the Den of Geek article, quote, "The 4th of July marathon started in 1983. It's become a Southern California tradition, right up there with your 4th of July activities, barbecues, picnics, and fireworks. People can turn on their TV sets and do their different activities and check out the marathon," which is exactly how I treat the marathon on New Year's or the 4th of July. You can either sit down for an excellent half-an-hour story, or you can just peer over at the TV occasionally as you're doing other things. The article continues to state that on the East Coast, New York's local station, WPIX Channel 11, which was syndicating the Twilight Zone since the early 70s, that channel in particular might have been the first channel to run the Twilight Zone marathon on New Year's Eve. Living on the East Coast myself, I definitely remember this network, but I don't really remember watching the Twilight Zone on it. Maybe I was just too young for that. But while I'm sure I potentially saw it on other networks, I always remember watching the Twilight Zone marathon on the Sci-Fi Channel. And as it turns out, to this day, the Sci-Fi Channel still runs the Twilight Zone marathon. So in the end, I have to assume the reason why this became a New Year's tradition for so many was simply because networks would run the marathon for most holidays. And New Year's was probably the biggest holiday that most marathons ran on, and so it eventually just became known for that. Whatever the reason, the Twilight Zone marathon began, and I'm so happy it did. Like an episode from the show itself, it's such an odd and seemingly meaningless happening. To have such a distinct show associated with a holiday like New Year's or 4th of July instead of what most people would associate it with, like Halloween, is so interesting to me. But like I mentioned earlier, I really don't think of Twilight Zone as a horror show. I feel like it's a disservice to what it actually is. And so even if it's a little odd, I think a New Year's or 4th of July marathon makes the most sense for the show. And you know what? If Twilight Zone can get a marathon on New Year's Eve, and if Golden Girls can get a marathon on Halloween Eve, why can't we get a Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles marathon on Valentine's Day Eve? Huh? Why can't we do that? I think that would be pretty nifty. I'm sure everyone would appreciate that too. Everybody encourage that new tradition quickly. Now, I really don't have cable anymore, but I like to replicate the marathon for myself if I can on New Year's. And I recommend those of you who are interested in the show after hearing me talk about it, or those of you who are already familiar with the show, to do the same every New Year's. Even if you only watch a handful of episodes on New Year's Eve, I think it's a really fun tradition. And if you've never watched The Twilight Zone and maybe have some apprehension because it's in black and white and potentially a bit slower when it comes to pacing and compared to other media, let me tell you, while it might not be for everybody, I think The Twilight Zone is one of the most important television shows ever made. For the time, it was extremely politically woke, it featured a number of high-profile actors before they became considerably famous, it showcases a number of fascinating, fantastical plots, and most importantly, it's influenced media in a tremendous way. For example, I strongly believe that even if you've never seen The Twilight Zone, I can almost guarantee you're familiar with a reference from the show. And I think that's a huge accomplishment, and believe me, it's affected all other media in the same way. So anyway, this New Year's Eve, I just wanted to share that little tradition that I had and that little memory that I've kept for so long. And I hope someone out there checks out The Twilight Zone this New Year's Eve or next New Year's Eve. And New Year's Day. We can watch Twilight Zone on New Year's Day as well. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this video. I want to thank you so much for watching this video. If for some reason you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a like and to subscribe to my channel for more. As regular viewers of the channel know, I make a wide variety of content, and I'm always gonna make the videos that I want to make. But if you see something you like, make sure to let me know, and I'll try to prioritize that kind of content in the future. If you want to watch me play video games live, check me out on Twitch at twitch.tv/carrotscraps, and all my other social media, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram are at carrotscraps as well. So I want to thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. And you know what? If Twilight Zone and Gilmore Girl, wait, and you know what? If okay, I'll